Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Marche, the webinar director here at Advice Chaser. Before we introduce our guest and get started, I do need to do a little bit of legal housekeeping. Advice Chaser, the host of this webinar, is not a registered investment advisor. We cannot and do not give financial advice. Today's presentation is for educational purposes only and cannot be considered advice for any person's individual situation. Advice Chaser regularly hosts informative webinars such as this one, featuring a variety of knowledgeable professionals, many of whom are licensed advisors. Any opinions, ideas, jokes, or principles expressed by presenters are their own. However, true, funny, or interesting are not endorsed by Advice Chaser. Please do not act on the information you hear today without consulting a qualified financial professional. Well, we are thrilled to have you here as guests of our educational event today, and I do need to let you know a little bit about how you can interact with us today. Attendees are muted, but we do encourage you, go ahead and ask questions using the chat box. The presenter will answer those queries during or after the presentation today as appropriate. If you ask a question in the chat box and we're not able to get to it, go ahead and leave your phone number and email address as well. If we can't get to your question during this event, we'll make sure someone else reaches out to you after today's event to make sure that question gets addressed. We want this experience to be as educational as possible. So please don't hesitate to ask for clarification or expansion of the material. Well, I'd love to introduce you to our speaker today. Brenda Bridges is a financial advisor, mediator, certified divorce financial analyst, retirement income certified professional, and certified divorce coach. She is also the founder of Bridging Divorce Solutions, which helps couples divorce by implementing a non-adversarial process, one that is not financially confusing and not unreasonably costly. Using alternative dispute resolution instead of or in addition to the court system means families can own their decisions and design their lives during and after divorce. Brenda and her team believe in changing the unknowns of divorce into an understandable and streamlined process, morphing fear into hope and questions into confidence. And Brenda, I know that something you also work on is helping people with looking through the future and blended families. And so that's what this webinar is all about today. And I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to you.
Well, thank you, Marche. I'm very happy to be here with Advice Chaser again. And we thought, since there is such a, there's a likelihood that families will be blended as a result of a lot of reshaping families through divorce. So we wanted to go through some of the pitfalls that people might not be aware of that can be relatively easily remedied if you know to look out for it. So here are some, we've labeled them mistakes. So let's talk about mistake number one, things to look out for as you are blending your families. And we're focusing specifically on the financial ramifications of blended families. So as you embark on this new adventure, you want to discuss your estate plans. And that means what happens to all the possessions, material and financial, that you bring into this partnership. How do you want them, in case you leave this planet too soon, to pass on to your family and new family? And this is frequently, if people have younger children, this is very top of mind. You know, who's going to care for my children? What are the guidelines going to be? How are they going to be funded if they're minors? But it's also really important to look at if your children are adults, especially if your remarriage or repartnering leaves a couple of different families of adults, and now you've blended your finances. If you're no longer here, but your new partner is, then how are things going to flow through? What is your intent? I recently ran across a situation where someone remarried, was joyful, very happy occasion, but didn't realize that by remarriage in the state in which she lived, it meant that everything she owned, unless she designated otherwise, went to her new husband, which was not her intent. And she had adult children, so they were sharing expenses, but she wanted her estate, if she was no longer here, to pass through to her biological children and then her grandchildren, rather than to go to her new spouse, who was financially secure in his own right. So it's just looking at what you want to happen for both parties and how you want your belongings and your finances to flow through. And the laws in your state might not support your intent. So you need to be really specific and mindful about outlining those and making sure that it's legal. And even though you intended for your funds, your finances, your investments to go to your children, if the law says it goes to your spouse, it's either going to go to your spouse or what they're inheriting is going to be a lawsuit. And nobody wants that to happen. So let's look at mistake number 2. A lot of these overlap, but we're going to call them out just to make sure they make the list of things that you should be looking for. Updating your beneficiary designations. So one of the first things that I counsel my clients with when their divorce is final is to look at your beneficiary situation. Sometimes, as part of your divorce decree, you're leaving your ex-spouse as beneficiary, especially if you have minor children. And that life insurance, if life insurance is the asset we're talking about, is meant to help support your children if you're no longer here. But then once those children age out, so say, you have a 12-year-old and you're divorced. Well, when they're 18 and you no longer have an obligation to fund them cooperatively with your co-parent, that beneficiary might not be changed. So you might need to leave it, set a reminder in your calendar. You might need to leave it in place for those 6 years, but after that, you might want it to go directly to your then adult children. You might be remarried. You need to look at what you want to happen. I suggest do a beneficiary checkup every year. It's easy to let, especially if you have many, many investments, to let some, I guess, slip away. Maybe you have an old 401k or something like that. It could be sitting there for 10 years with a beneficiary that when you look at it, you go, oh my, not my intent. So make sure you're updating your designations. Do you intend, if you remarry and have children separately, and then perhaps joint children, how do you want that to line up? Do you want the funds to go first to your spouse, which is normally what happens, especially if beneficiaries are not designated? It will default to whatever the rules in the state are. But if you want a portion to go to your new spouse and a portion to go to your children, you really need to fill out the form so it reflects that. Do you want, and that would be each getting a percentage. Do you want to put a contingency in place, a contingent beneficiary? So what that means is you have a tier 1 first level. If something happens to you, then that person or persons are going to inherit first. But maybe if they are no longer able to be the recipients, perhaps there was a car accident and both people pass away, who's the contingency? What is the contingency plan? Who do you want then to inherit those funds? And you can look at it differently for different investments. If you say have adult children that you want to get a portion of their inheritance should you pass away. And I know this stuff is hard to talk about, but it's really important that we talk about it. So say you have children who are adult and they're in their 20s and they might have school loans or want to start a business or need a leg up, you might want to leave a portion of your estate to them immediately. And then the rest of it goes to your current spouse. So there are a lot of what ifs when you're looking at beneficiaries, and you just want to make sure that every single thing is spelled out for every single investment.
Uh, so a question we got here was, what sort of assets have beneficiary forms?
Oh, that's a really good question. Any investment that you hold individually will have a beneficiary form. And there will also be laws in your state, wherever you reside, that say, if you don't name a beneficiary, who the funds go to. So if you have offspring, but you don't name a beneficiary, it would go to them if you're not married. But if you are married, it's most likely going to go to your spouse and not your children. So the investments would be things like a brokerage account, mutual funds accounts, any kind of IRA, Roth IRA. If you have a 401k or another 403b, 457, another type of retirement account through your employer, that will have a beneficiary that you can name. Life insurance will certainly have a beneficiary that would be named. Let's see what else. This is kind of getting into trusts, but if you own property, then that's going to flow through. You don't name a beneficiary on property, but usually it's the number one or number two investment that a family might have. And that's where you want to look at having an up-to-date will and trust so that your portion of those assets in the house, so say you co-purchase a house with your new spouse, what happens then if they pass away or if you pass away? Does the spouse inherit it, or does it flow through to your children or your line, your side's beneficiaries? And for that, you need to put something else in place to name who the beneficiary of the asset is. But you also need to look at that debt and who the responsible party for the debt is. So if you're co-signed on a loan with your partner, does then the debt shift entirely to the partner, but the assets shift to the children? So you can see how this stuff can be complicated.
Yeah.
You have to walk down the road of, okay, what would happen if? Look at it as for everything you own. You know, so it can be property, it can be investments, it might be material belongings, it might be things like artwork or jewelry or automobiles. So anything that is considered an asset, it's going to have its own path. There are going to be beneficiary forms for anything that's financial as an asset, but anything that's material, it might not be covered that way. So you want to make sure that it's accounted for in another fashion. That's going to be a will and trust.
Great. And I will say that, of course, this is not legal advice.
None of it.
The law is
So
different in every state too.
Exactly. So you want to make sure that you're working with professionals who are familiar with your circumstance and with your state and those laws. Like I moved a couple of years ago from Illinois to Chattanooga, and the first thing that we did was address our estate plan because it's different here than it was in Illinois. So to update it, to basically make it simpler for both of our children, because we are a blended family. If something happens to either of us, we've spelled out what should happen and they don't have to deal with it.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to
Mistake number 3, not looking at life insurance in estate planning. So this might come into play not only for the beneficiary point of view, but in that example of if you want your children to have something immediately should you pass away, but you want your spouse to be financially secure as well, then life insurance policies can be a way that you make sure there is some immediate help or inheritance. So say a couple has remarried, one party passes away, but their spouse lives another 30 or 40 years. And they've determined that they want to share assets. Well, in that scenario, their new spouse could spend all of their estate if that's how they've set it up. And their children could actually, the individual who passed away, there are a lot of pronouns here, their intent could be that their children get something from that. And life insurance is a way to ensure that something is passed on immediately and the spouse is taken care of or has access to some of the assets. And a lot of that, again, working with an estate planning attorney, you can go to them and say, this is what I want to happen. And then their job is to counsel you as to how it can happen legally and how the assets can flow through in the way you intend them to flow through. And then you work with a financial advisor to make sure that it's executable. And actually, Marche, I don't think we put this in here as a mistake, but another mistake is to put your will and trust in place and then not fund it. Because
Yes.
if you put it in place, but then you don't name where appropriate your trust as the beneficiary, it's not executable. It's basically a wish without backing. So your intent is there, but if your beneficiaries are naming someone else, what is named on those assets is where the money will flow. So you want to make sure that's done thoughtfully, again, with help of experts who can direct you in that.
Yeah, that's a good point. When we've done webinars with estate planning attorneys, I say that's one of the mistakes that they see, and it's tragic.
Right, right. It can be
Yeah.
such a relief to get that done, to have your estate plan in place, your will and trust is signed. It's actually pretty ceremonial. But if you don't back it up by changing the beneficiaries to reflect it, then your job's not done.
Or for instance, you haven't actually purchased the insurance policy
Right,
that would fund the account, or
right.
maybe you've, yeah, that could be a big mistake too.
And following up on that, no insurance policy is done until it's actually underwritten and paid for. So if your intent is to put that in place and that's how you've structured your estate plan, but it's not executable, so maybe someone can't get life insurance. It happens, someone can't be underwritten due to a health condition, or maybe because they have too much life insurance and a company will not underwrite them for more. There could be multiple reasons. But if the intent is that they have it, but then they're not able to do it, again, your will and your trust is not executable. So if you're putting that in place and using life insurance, a tip would be get underwritten and make sure that you can actually do it before you finalize the rest of the plan.
Yeah, great.
Okay, number 4, and this is a big one. Again, because it's hard to talk about these things, not communicating your estate plans with your beneficiaries. So letting your family know, especially if it's a blended family, and some families are blended on multiple levels. There might be children on both sides from a prior relationship, and then joint children that people have together. And then there could possibly be another family. Like, a lot of this can be very intertwined. If you haven't sorted it out and let people know what your intent is, and then you're no longer here and they find out by surprise, it can be simply bad feelings, which no one wants, but it could also get much more serious and be fissures in the family and lawsuits that can spend a lot of the estate's money or individuals' money trying to solve what they think the intent was versus what actually happened. So if you're able to sit down to the degree that is appropriate for your beneficiaries and have the conversations with them about what you want to happen and how it's going to happen. And you really don't need to explain the whys of it. That's your personal decision and up to you how you want your estate to look. But to let them know prior to anything happening how it's going to unfold is going to be a gift to them in the long run, because it's going to save a lot. It's going to give them both the chance to ask questions if they want to ask questions and avoid potential lawsuits and arguments and bad feelings down the road.
It's so funny. When you talk about this, it reminds me of my own parents going through this process. And the fact that they're like, we're having our will put together, and it just created an opportunity to talk about those things.
Mhm.
And so everyone in our family knows who the executor is going to be. We
Yep.
know what's going with the extra properties and things like that. And there is a sense of peace just personally that I found knowing that. And there's no question what, and then we, when they eventually pass, we can focus on transitioning as
Right.
opposed to like trying to figure out all the financial mess that could potentially be there.
Right. And mind read in retrospect. The other thing, and we've gone through this with my parents, my father in particular, is by bringing in your beneficiaries, they might think of something that you haven't thought of or
Mm,
help you sort out things. So we've done the same kind of workshopping with my father, what he wants to happen. And by all of us talking about it, we came up with a different solution than he had originally started with. And just the feeling for him of, yes, that's how I want it to look, made it much simpler, and it gave him a lot of peace.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
All
Let's look
right.
at mistake number 5.
Okay.
Delaying creating a will or trust. So we talked a little bit about just doing it. Again, it's not like, oh, I'm going on vacation. Oh, I get to see the estate planning attorney. This is so much fun. It's not, but when it's done, it's a huge relief. And it's a gift to pass that on to your beneficiaries. So when you're no longer here and they might be in a space where they're really grieving, they're not trying to battle through making these decisions that they don't feel equipped to make, perhaps at the time. You are giving them the gift to remember you and celebrate your life without sorting through a bunch of details that they might not feel equipped to sort through, especially at that really emotional time. A lot of people have a misunderstanding that you have to, like, oh, I don't need a will. I don't have that much in assets. I don't need a trust. Like that's for someone who's uber wealthy. When in fact, and again, defer to a trust, someone who is knowledgeable in your state, a professional who handles this. But the rule of thumb that I've heard is anything over $100,000 should have a trust in place. And at the very minimum, by having a trust in place, you should be able to avoid probate in your state. So what does that mean? It means rather than your estate, so all of your assets, your house, your belongings, flowing through the legal system of the state, which in some states, if they're really backlogged, can take months, even years. It avoids that process and can just be executed as you want it to be executed. The other thing it avoids for your beneficiaries is the cost of probate, because it's not free to have it flow through the legal system of your state. And it could also mean that someone who could really benefit from their inheritance at the time of your departure can't get it for months or years, and then it might be less. Mistake number 5, delaying. So by not delaying, kind of reverse there, people don't have to guess what your intent was. Like you might talk about it a lot and it might shift from year to year. And if you don't have it updated and written out, they might be sitting around the kitchen table going, oh no, this is what they meant. Oh no, this is what they meant. Oh no, this is what I thought they meant or heard they meant. By having this all written down and updated, you eliminate their need to do that. It's clear. You also, like I mentioned, we moved from Illinois to Tennessee and I restated my will and trust to make sure that it was compatible with the laws of the state, because they're going to be different. Mistake number 6. So that was a lot about forward planning, trust planning, what you want things to look like for your beneficiaries. Now we're going to talk a little bit about how you want things to look in your day-to-day life and money management. So a mistake could be not being upfront with how you look at money or what your spending habits are. You You want to make sure that you don't have to be on the same page, but you need to be having the conversations, and it can eliminate a lot of drama and trauma down the road. One of the leading causes of divorce is having financial, not difficulties, but disagreements. If one is a spender and one is a saver, if one is extravagant and one is very frugal, if one, you get the idea. If you look at money differently, but you don't talk about how differently you look at money, then you're setting yourself up for arguments that might be needless. You might also be setting yourself up for financial difficulties that you could avoid if you have the conversations. So you want to talk about your spending. You want to at least come to an understanding about, and we use the example here of small things, like if someone is used to getting a manicure every week and that is part of their standard of living, and it might be beyond just, I like to have my nails done, it might be part of their social life, it might be very, very important to them. And their partner might look at that as, well, that just take that money and flush it or throw it out the window. All that is some paint on your nails. So having those discussions, and in that, that's a $20 a week discussion, it might be something much more significant. A club membership, whatever these things are, to have that talk about what your philosophy is, what is important to you. As you merge households, especially if you're pooling money, can deflect a lot of potential arguments or bitterness about where that money is going. So let's look at our next one. Number 7, kind of on the same page, but a little different, not being forthright about the money you owe or earn. So if you're merging finances and find out after the fact, so say you remarried and after the fact, you find out that your new spouse has a HELOC on an old home that they never disclosed, or maybe they owe for college loans that you weren't aware of. Maybe there was a bankruptcy. There could be little debt issues like, oh, there's a credit card, let's start fresh, pay it off together. It might be a big deal that impacts you now that your finances are tied together, that you really want to talk about prior to being in that marital contract. The same thing can go for income as debt. So if you disclose to your partner that maybe you make $200,000 a year, but you don't disclose to your partner that you get another $200,000 a year in bonuses because you want that off to the side and look at it as, well, that's my bonus. Again, it's all about communication and conversation. You're setting yourself up with some secrets that it's easier to deal with by being forthright and having the talks than it is keeping it off to the side in the partnership. One thing that comes up frequently in divorce when we're looking at property and separate property is inheritance. And that's another thing to have a discussion about, because if you're more mature and you're in a new relationship and your parents pass away or parent and leave you through their well-planned out estate plan, an inheritance, how is that going to be handled? Is that yours to spend, save, use for your future, or is that joint? And be really aware that if you intend it to be individual, but you deposit it in a joint account, that is often considered a gift to the new relationship or marriage because it's now titled jointly. If you use it to put a down payment on a house for your mortgage, and that is titled jointly, gift to the marriage. So those are the things that if your intent is to keep it separate, you need to get counsel on how to keep it separate. And if your intent is to blend it, then just be clear on what you're doing with inheritance as that flows through. And you've already had those wonderful discussions with your parents, so you also know what their intent was. And if their intent was that you safeguard that money that then goes to their grandchildren, but it ends up going to your new marriage sideways, then you're not fulfilling the intent that you had with your parents. Another thing to do, and this is just good financial planning rule of thumb, is you get a free credit report every single year. Run it for each of you. And then you can see if there's anything wayward. It's super easy now to get online for the most part. And if you see something that isn't appropriate on your credit report, you can fix it. So you can just go online. It usually doesn't even take paperwork, and just fill out a form to keep your credit report clean, smooth, and accurate. So if you do that jointly as part of your financial planning process, it's another way to not have any surprises for your new partner. Mistake number, are we back in 7, 8?
We're at 8.
Plan, all about financial planning. So a pitfall here is, especially if finances were contentious in a prior relationship, is keep on keeping on. Like if you're still doing things in a fashion that caused a lot of irritation in your relationships before, it's a really good idea to look at that and see if there are some course corrections that can be made so that in your new relationship, you're not running into those same tripping points or landmines, right? So try to get clear with yourself and your new partner about your financial philosophy. How do you look at money? A lot of us carry a mindset from our youth. You know, did you come from a household that, you know, saving happened first, and then if there was anything left over, you might spend it on what was considered an indulgent. That indulgence, that kind of mindset filters through, and we carry with us a lot of it. If you're then married to someone whose money mindset was, there's always going to be more, I'm cool spending it because I'll just earn some more, and you're suddenly in the same household with these really divergent points of view, then that can lead to arguments. So you've probably seen a theme here. A lot of what we're talking about when you're blending finances is how to avoid contention, how to avoid arguments, how to make your new relationship smoother. Have a plan, know where the other person is coming from. Try to understand that their philosophy might be different from your philosophy. How are you going to blend philosophies so they work together? And then how do you live with that day to day? And it can be little stuff that can cause big problems. So think if you're used to doing the grocery shopping and you look at every price for that can of ketchup or jar of ketchup or whatever, and you are diligent about picking the least expensive one, but you send your new partner to the store and they love organic and it doesn't matter that it's $10 instead of $3 and they buy that, like that kind of stuff gets into relationships. So if you're able to table it and notice it and talk about it, you're going to be way better off. One of the things to talk about, if you're coming in with debt, is how it will be handled. Does that stay one party's debt? Is it going to become a joint debt, just like things become joint assets? How is that going to impact your budget overall? What is the threshold amount? This is a big one. What's it okay to spend before you need to talk with the other person? And this isn't about asking permission. It's about having joint and respectful decision-making, right? So maybe it's $300, maybe it's $500, maybe it's $50. It's up to you. But where's the point where in your family finances, you need to check in with your partner to make sure it was okay to buy that thing, you know? For some, it might be a really high threshold. It might be, okay, you bought a property, you know, you bought a house and you didn't need to check in with me if the family finances support it. And it might be, you know, we're running a tight ship here. So if you want to go spend, you know, $2,000 on a used boat, and I know that would be an expensive boat, let's say it's a very nice canoe, you need to check in and be okay with that together. So point there is figure out what your number is, what's your dollar amount that's cool for the other person to spend, and you don't need to check in, and what is the amount where you really would prefer to have a conversation about that, especially if you've decided that your money in your household is joint. Mistake number 8. Oh, we did that. 9, we're on to 9. Not creating a financial plan for your new family. So this is kind of flowing through. You've talked about your spending, your daily habits, what you're each bringing, not only financially, but emotionally and mindset wise about money. Now, what are you going to do with it? You know, are you having a retirement plan that you're putting together? How are you going to handle, especially if you're coming with, well, it can be minor or adult children. How are you going to handle their expenses, or if they need help or support? Are you going to pool your money and all are equal? Are each of you going to say, I am responsible for my child's support in a way? And you can see this coming up in things like different families bringing different views on things like education. You know, one party might be, I paid for school myself, I paid for college myself, my kids are going to pay for college themselves, this is what I believe. Where another party might be, oh, no, this is really important to me, and I will do everything I can to pay for my children's college so that they can get an education and enjoy themselves and have this experience. We're talking tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars difference in a point of view there. How are you going to handle it? And it can be little things too, like birthday presents. You know, some, and I think we have this somewhere else in here, for some, it might be, you know, $30. That's a great birthday present. It just needs to be a token. They know I love them. Others might be very used to, oh no, we go on a trip and it's thousands. How are you going to deal with it? You know, if in your blended family, you're attending the wedding of your best friend's child, are you both paying for that? Or is one party paying for that? A discussion. On to mistake number 10. Let's see. There we go. More of not setting expectations. How are you going to support your traditions and your expectations, or blend them? Are you going to keep on keeping on with how you've always done things, or are you going to make new traditions and new financial decisions? So one party might be used to spending significant amount on holiday gifts, where one party might be, oh no, we get together and we cook dinner and play games and that's it. How is this going to come together? So having those discussions. Another example would be vacations. You know, if your way of vacationing before was you're going to hike and pitch a tent, and another was I'm going to a, you know, full service 5-star spa, some discussions need to take place so that it's not causing contention. Next one, number 11, coming up with a budget you can live with. Who's going to do the budget? Usually one person manages the finances in the family, but both people should be informed so that you've got a method of managing it. And you're aware of your financial situation. You can access, you know, I've had clients say before to me, oh, if something happened to my wife, I wouldn't even know where to find things. Well, if that's the case, then what's the solution? You know, do you use something like LastPass, where you don't need to know all of the passwords, but you know where to get them? What sort of oversight will each have? I know, again, money causes conflict, and conflict about money often leads to divorce. And we're not talking about that, but let's talk about learning from those lessons. So having oversight. So if it's like, oh, I thought that they were always paying the bills on time, and then a year later and hundreds of dollars in late fees, you find out that, you know, really wasn't their jam and the bills were not paid. Figure out oversight here. What kind of method, or, you know, are you going to have a monthly meeting where you just get a debrief on here's the state of the union for our finances in our union? If expenses go off track, what are you going to do? You know, maybe you had something that was very unexpected. Maybe someone spent over their spending limit. It's so much easier to have a plan before the thing happens than for the thing to happen and then have to deal with it. So talking about your spending, expenses, budget, priorities, what are your must-haves? What is your wish list? And how do they interplay is really useful for a relationship. It's also useful for your financial well-being. So next one, mistake, more of the same. Oh, so yeah,
This one was a long discussion when we
this
did our
one was a
preparation.
long talk. And I'm going to jump to the bottom bullet here, the second to the bottom. There is no right or wrong way. You decide what works for you, but honor your partner and find out what works for them and then come up with it together. Conversation. That's my banging that drum over and over again. So you can look at handling finances as one pool. We're going to put it all in a pot. We're going to decide how we spend it. There is not yours and mine, it is ours. And then you come up with your own set of guidelines for how that's handled. There might be a middle ground where you say, okay, all of the joint expenses, we're going to pool 50-50 or whatever the percentage is. Some people use percent of income, right? And then anything that's personal. So say you live in a town where your children and friends and family are all in that town, and you married someone whose children, friends, family are across the country, and it's really important to them to go visit. Maybe they say, that's important to me, that's coming out of my own budget, as opposed to your budget. You get the idea. So you might have kind of a hybrid between all in one pool and the things that are individual. And some couples work very well with separate everything. They, instead of putting all the money in the pot, they decide like one might pay the mortgage and one might pay all the utility bills. Who knows how it looks, but they keep separate accounts, separate beneficiaries, separate everything, and then decide how they're going to contribute to the expenses that are truly joint expenses, but they're not doing it by putting all the money in the same pot. Figuring out how you're going to do this, again, avoids built-in conflicts of the, and it might be things like usage that you want to take into account too. Say, maybe golfing is really important to one spouse, but not the other. And you can come up with a different, maybe better example, eating out. Say it's really important to one person, but they're sharing the cost of this 50-50. That might create some contention. So you either got to be good in your heart with it and know that your new partner loves golfing, and that's going to run hundreds, it could be thousands of dollars a month, depending. Or you have that conversation and say, golf is not my thing, and I really am not comfortable paying towards that. So you go do it, but let's keep that sidelined or in your column for expenses.
As we're going through this, I just think that these are maybe just conversations that new couples, even if they're not blended families, have to have anyway as well. Yeah. And maybe we get into marriage. I can say from my own perspective, sometimes you get into marriage not knowing how to have these conversations. Mm-hmm. So we did have, well, I'm going to hold that question at the end. Let's go ahead and get to the next one here.
Huge mistake, no prenup or postnup. All this is like there's a lot of baggage around this wording, right? And there tends to be this, oh no, we love each other, we don't need that. All it is a financial plan. So all of these things that we've talked about are about how you're going to handle your money. A prenup or postnup is writing that down, memorializing how you're going to handle your money. And you can love each other for the rest of your lives. There's a certain peace of mind that comes from having this all talked out, worked out. You can avoid arguments. You can, as you talk through these things, figure out how to best, when you're working, especially with professionals who are knowledgeable, figure out how to best structure your estate to protect the person that you love. Like, it doesn't have to be, oh, if this goes south, this is, taking care of me. It can be very much like, what is the best way for us to structure our assets as this new union forever moving forward. So it doesn't have to be thought of as a negative. I'm a very, very strong believer in doing a prenup, and you can do a postnup. So you're already married and you haven't had some of these conversations. Now is a really good time to have those conversations and figure out how you want things to look. And this can be part of your estate planning. So you're just deciding, you're making decisions in advance. You're also saving yourself potentially a lot of money and time and anxiety in litigation and in court down the road. You're also staying out of what could be some really, as we look at blended families and reblended families, what can get to be really complicated situations. So it's a way or a prompt to sort a lot of this out. Okay, next one. Doing a prenup or postnup, just flying through this, you're deciding. There's not a, oh, what if this happens? You're actively working together to make decisions together before you're faced with it, which is when they're easier. This is also something, and this is common in long-term marriage. We also see it a lot in what is called gray divorce. If one parent party has stayed home and taken care of running the household, raising the children, so they're the COO of the family. If you've talked about that and laid it out that it has a value in a prenup or postnup, then it avoids a lot of, I guess, worth issues, maybe a way to say it, because you are assigning value to, you might not be getting paid for that work. Nevertheless, it is work and it does have value. And you can state that in your agreement. And it is just another layer that reinforces that will and estate plan that you've already put together. Okay, number 13. This is something, looking at your Social Security benefits, there are some really key points, and then there are some generalities. So if you're younger, this probably doesn't matter as much. If you are older, especially if you're getting to the point where Social Security, you might be looking at claiming or close to claiming, and especially if Social Security is a big part of your financial plan and picture, you want to take a look at the benefits and how remarriage may enhance or diminish it. And we're not going to get into rules, but I will give you an example. Woman got divorced and she was in a long-term marriage and they were very affluent, but she did not work. Because of their long-term marriage, so over 10 years, because she did not work, she was eligible for a spousal claim on his Social Security, which he was at the maximum for Social Security contributions. She remarried 2 weeks shy of her 60th birthday. Those 2 weeks cost her her Social Security from her first marriage. So you just want to look into the rules. If she had married after 60, she would have been able to claim the old relationship. So there are some things in there that check with someone who is expert in Social Security, especially, I'm going to say if you're 50 plus, but you might want to check no matter what. Certainly if you were married the first time for more than 10 years, because that is a tipping point for Social Security. And just make sure that you're not taking an action that you unknowingly could impact what you're able to claim down the road in Social Security. Another thing that I frequently hear, just kind of as an aside, is, oh, my ex-husband's going to get remarried, so I can't claim his Social Security. Not the case. Anyone's remarriage does not affect the ability of their ex-spouse to claim Social Security. So as long as you're eligible for it and don't unintentionally break other rules, what your former spouse does not impact your claim. What you do can impact it, but what they do does not. Hopefully that makes sense. Bottom line, check into Social Security.
I would just go ahead and maybe clarify here that you're getting Social Security on someone's work record, it doesn't reduce your own. So I feel like some people feel like, oh, that's going to reduce what I get. That's not how Social Security works.
No,
we do have several webinars about Social Security on Advice Chaser. So
yeah, so check those out. But there can be multiple claimants on the same work record. Yeah. I think this might be our last one, number 4.
Oh, we've got 2 more.
Oh, 2 more. Okay. Not having financial agreements. So we've talked a lot about new partnerships and marriage. When you're living together, and especially if you're commingling your funds, you want to know where you live, how it impacts that. There might be different rules. There might be common law marriage in your state or partnership. There might not be, and you think there is. So things can get complicated, especially when you're buying things together. So if you're not married and you're in a state where there is no common law marriage and you're living together and you buy a home together, how is the best way to structure that? So anytime you're looking at commingling funds or combining assets, and you might be in a committed and long-term relationship, but you don't have what could be the protection of the contract of marriage, looking at how that impacts all of your investments, especially your investments and rights together, is really worthwhile. Number 15.
Our last one.
Okay, not working with professionals. Yeah, we've referenced it a lot. Some of these things can be very complicated, and yet some of them, when you work with a professional, can be very simple. So everyone's got their own area of expertise. We all do. Everyone on this webinar has their own unicorn power, right? Their special area of expertise. Work with the people who can help guide you through how to make the best decisions for your situation. And a good professional will listen to you and your intent and your situation and give you ideas and give you advice as to what to look out for and what is the best, most efficient way for you to reach your goals. So I highly recommend working with the appropriate professional to navigate making sure what you want to happen with your partner is actually doable, executable, and that you don't make any mistakes that impact you, both of you, and your finances in a way that you didn't intend. And there we have it.
All right, we don't have a lot of time left, but I did want to get in a couple questions. Someone asked, how frequent should you go over your budget together? I guess it would be that they want some examples of what you've seen that works.
Yeah, partnership decision. Some couples do it annually, some do it monthly. It really is what works for you. Ideally, I would think that as you're establishing a budget, you go over it at least monthly, and then things that bubble up that need discussion, you're going to nip them in the bud before. If you wait for a year to look at that stuff, then some things might be festering or some things might not be as easily addressed as they would be if you look at it every month. And then maybe after a year, you've got your routine, you're on the same page, your budget is working, then maybe you don't need to look at it as often.
All right, let's end with this one. This is a really maybe rich topic, and we could maybe get into it on another webinar. But how is your retirement planning affected by remarriage?
That's a really good question, and that probably could be a topic for a whole nother webinar. Well, it's certainly affected depending on how you're handling your finances. If you're choosing to keep everything separate, then you're going to have a separate retirement plan. And you're going to look for what your goals are and what finances and cash flow and drawdown plan you need to achieve that. If you've decided to blend finances and you have joint goals, then ideally you're working with a planning professional who is helping you integrate that and see how to best fund it. And this becomes like, this is certainly another whole nother webinar. You know, what if there's a big age difference? Your plans might be very different and you need to accommodate for that. I once encountered a couple where the husband was 20 years older than the wife, and he had his retirement plan in place. But when we look at both female longevity and the age difference, it was not adequate at all for her. It was plenty for him. She was likely to outlive him by another 20 to 30 years, given the age difference in longevity, and there wasn't enough to fund it. So you want to look at things like that. As with any plan, you know, start with your goals. What do you want it to do? And then look at your resources and then put them together and figure out what the best way to execute that is. And if it doesn't work, how you need to adapt and improve.
Well, thank you so much. Sorry, I did not mean to interrupt you. I thought you were at the end of
No.
the sentence there.
A lot.
Well, on behalf of Advice Chaser, we want to thank Brenda for being here and for our for the organizations that have worked with us to bring you this webinar today. Attendees, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Look for an email soon with a replay of this event, and you're welcome to share that replay with your friends and family. Here at Advice Chaser, we're all about helping you find a financial advisor who's a great fit for your life and your financial questions. Our matching service is free to you, and every one of our advisor partners has committed to offer a free initial consultation to anyone we introduce them to. Find out more by going to advicechaser.com and clicking on the link to find an advisor. Once again, from Advice Chaser, thank you so much for coming, and we'll see you at another webinar soon. Goodbye, everyone.